Just a moment ago, I showed you some of the protests that greeted Vice President J.D. Vance when he tried to go skiing this weekend at Sugarbush in Vermont. Waitsfield, Vermont, absolutely filled up with people telling him to get out of town. J.D. Vance is a traitor. Go ski in Russia. But you know what? Do not underestimate the stamina and determination and cold tolerance of New Englanders when it gets to this part of the winter. They can pretty much take anything. So not only did they protest J.D. Vance at the ski mountain up in Waitsfield, Vermont, telling him to get out of town, there was also a whole nother group of protesters waiting for him when he tried to get out of town. This wasn't Waitsfield. Just drop the chyron here so people can see here. Yeah. But this was the route to the airport for J.D. Vance in South Burlington, Vermont. Protesters also turned out there, sending him off as he tried to leave the state. They called it his farewell send-off. And you know, it wasn't just Vermont getting out in the streets to show their support for Ukraine and their objections to the United States allying itself with Vladimir Putin. This was Charlotte, North Carolina this weekend, and Bentonville, Arkansas, and Washington, D.C., and Seattle, Washington this weekend. Protesters holding pro-Ukraine, anti-Russia demonstrations in the wake of President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance allying themselves with the Russian Federation and against our ally. That was this weekend. Now, today, we are confronting a series of headlines that seem to make it official. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth orders a halt to cyber operations against Russia. Trump administration halting cyber operations against Russia, even as Russia appears to have intensified its cyber operations against our allies in NATO and in Ukraine. Further news just tonight as we're getting on the air that the United States is not only starting the process of dropping sanctions on Russia, White House reportedly ordering the Treasury Department and the State Department to explore the end to Russian sanctions, but also now putting a stop to all U.S. aid to Ukraine in the middle of this war. Joining us now is NBC News correspondent Courtney Kuby. She covers the Pentagon and national security. Courtney, it's really nice of you to make time to be here tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Can you put sort of in layman's terms for us what these things together mean? We've seen the headline about Cyber Command. We've seen the headline about dropping Russian sanctions. We've seen the headline about pausing all U.S. aid to Ukraine. Can you help us understand what viewers might need to understand about what this means for this U-turn in the U.S. government?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's really two sides to this argument. There are the people who believe that this is just part of negotiating, that you make some sacrifices or some changes during negotiation, whether it's a show of good faith or getting the other side to the table. And then there are other people who clearly think this is nothing but capitulation to Russia. So the two sides broken down. What this Cyber Command decision or order from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth does is it is pausing all offensive cyber operations against Russia and all offensive information operations against Russia. But the key here is we don't know how long this is supposed to last. There are some officials who say this is while the U.S. is actively involved in trying to be this mediator between Russia and Ukraine to try to end the war. And there are others who say, look, we don't have any sense of what the timeline could be and when this actually could end. Now, there are critics or people who are concerned that this is a time where the United States should be stepping up their gathering on Russia, particularly when it comes to information operations. But at this point, it appears that all of that is halted, and the timeline, again, is really unclear for that. The next issue on the weapons, on the military equipment that the United States has been flowing in, and Rachel, you know, whether people are in favor of actually sending these weapons and this equipment to Ukraine or not, there is no doubt that this has been a logistical feat and hurdle to get these billions and billions of dollars of, in some cases, massive equipment, weapons, ammunition into Ukraine so that they've been able to stave off the Russian offensive that began just over 3 years ago. Well, what we've learned late today is that, in fact, the Trump administration, at least for now again, has paused the delivery of any additional military weapons or equipment to Ukraine. Now, You may say, well, we haven't been hearing about the Trump administration announcing any additional sending of any additional weapons, and that is right. Basically, the Biden administration used almost all of the money that they had allocated to send to buy weapons or to send from U.S. stockpiles and then reimburse U.S. stockpiles for Ukraine. There was about $3.8 or so billion that were left in that, but there's not any money that's still left to reimburse the U.S. military for that. So that money has basically been paused. There really hasn't been any new spending to Ukraine, but there was money, or there was still additional weapons and equipment that were being sent as part of other disbursements. So, for instance, one of the last presidential drawdown authority announcements had some refurbished vehicles. Those were still being flown into Ukraine. And then there's another pot of money that has existed for the last 3 years called the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. That's sort of longer-term weapon systems and equipment that could take years in some cases to deliver to Ukraine. What we found out tonight is that the United States is pausing all of those shipments for now. And again, just like the Cyber Command decision, it's just not how clear that's going to last. Now, why I keep going back to how long these decisions and these announcements will last is because it will prove whether this really is something that the United States has decided to do as part of a negotiation, or whether it is, as some have claimed, that this could be a sign of, in an effort that President Trump has made very clear that he wants to normalize relations with Moscow, that this could be part of a capitulation to that effort, Rachel.
And just to be clear, with all of these things that Russia has now received effectively, just in terms of deal points from the U.S. government, halting aid to Ukraine, moving to end sanctions on Russia, having a high-level U.S. government meeting between the Russian and U.S. government, President Trump publicly advocating that Russia be let back in the G7, saying that he wants to have a one-on-one summit with Vladimir Putin, Russia being invited to reopen their embassy and full consulate strength in the United States. With all of these things that the U.S. has now given to Russia in terms of deal points, has Russia given us anything?
If so, it's nothing that we are aware of at this point. I mean, and officials, when the Cybercom thing first came up, officials were saying, look, the United States needs to show some good faith here. So is it possible that Russia will give something? Vladimir Zelensky has made it very clear that he doesn't believe that Russia will negotiate in good faith in any way. At this point, we're not aware of anything that they have given to the U.S. for these things.
Yeah. At some point, the map doesn't work, right? Courtney Kuby, I really appreciate you being here. I really appreciate it. Thank you. All right, we've got more news ahead. Stay with us.